What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the hawkshoops podcast. I am, of course, your host, Hawk. We got a lot to talk about today. A lot to talk about. I don't want to make this episode too long, so bear with me. We're going to try to get through everything in an efficient and quick, but also informative manner. Trade deadline, obviously, just passed on this past Thursday. Believe it or not, it was one of the busiest trade deadlines in NBA history. The most trades happened on that day. 17 trades were reported on the deadline. 45 players were moved. 23 different teams made a trade. Almost every team was active this trade deadline. And then 5% of the league's win production was traded at the deadline. So when a player, advanced stats, every player is assigned a certain amount of win shares. And so 5% of the league's win shares was traded. Random stat, but one of the most active trade deadlines in NBA history. But before we get started and jumping into the trades, and I'm going to break down how I'm going to go through this. Once again, thanks for pulling up to the podcast. Reminder, you can always watch us on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pocket Casts. Wherever podcasts are found, you can find the hawkshoops podcast. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Like, a lot of trades happened. I probably won't go into crazy detail about every trade. Some of the major ones I definitely want to talk about. But first, we're just going to go ahead and start talking about the Orlando Magic, because the Orlando Magic basically just had a fire sale and proved, I guess, that they're just willing to run with their young guys. They're going to rebuild. They're going to hit the reset button. They were one of those teams for the last couple of years. This is what I call NBA mediocrity, where they weren't really a team that was an upper seed actually making a title contention. And they were a team that was just, bottom of the playoff bracket, 8, 7, maybe a 6 seed the last couple of seasons. And they said, hey, this isn't working for us. Let's hit the reset. Let's stick with our young guys. And they, got some good things back, and some teams cashed out on some of their great players. Good players. I'll take back great. One of the teams that cashed out on the Magic's fire sale are the Bulls. The Bulls acquired Nikola Vucevic and Al-Farouq Aminu for Wendell Carter and Otto Porter Jr. And the Bulls' 2021 and 2023 first-round picks. Both of those are top 4 protected. So what does this mean for the Bulls? For the Bulls, it means that they got another all-star to pair with Zach LaVine. And it means that the Bulls are ready to officially start making the playoffs, and ironically step into the place that the Magic are now stepping out of, which is what I call NBA mediocrity. But when you've been the Bulls, you've had a player like Zach LaVine who's proven to be a really, really good player in the league these last couple of seasons, especially this season, and he's a free agent in summer 2022, so you got to show him that you're willing to start winning. You're willing to start putting the team around him to start winning games. And Nikola Vucevic is a top 10 center of the league. He's been a top 10 center of the league for the last couple of seasons, in my opinion. We're getting 25 points a game, 11 rebounds, 40% from the three-point line. Not necessarily great defensively, but the offensive firepower between him and Zach LaVine is going to be great. He got a solid defender in Al-Farouq Aminu. I'm not sure exactly what he has in the tank left, but his last couple of seasons with Portland, he was a really good defender for that team, and Portland's defense suffered when he wasn't on that team. The Magic, like I said, they're sticking with the young guys, and their fire sale was not over. Another team that benefited from the fire sale, the Nuggets traded for Aaron Gordon and Gary Clark, and the Magic received Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, and the Nuggets 2025 first-round pick, top 5 protected. This feels like I guess I'll say a knee-jerk reaction by the Nuggets, or instead of an active move, I guess we'll say a reactive move to the fact that they didn't keep Jeremy Grant. If they kept Jeremy Grant, I don't think they make this trade at all at the deadline. If they kept Jeremy Grant, I think they're higher in the Western Conference standings, feel more confident, and don't feel the need to make this trade. Because Aaron Gordon, to me, is, I've said it before, I think I said it in last week's episode, he's like great value Blake Griffin. And Jeremy Grant is doing so much more than Aaron Gordon is this season alone with the Pistons. Granted, he's the number 1 option on the Pistons. There's nobody else there, but we know Jeremy Grant is good defensively. He can be good defensively. I think him and Michael Porter Jr. could have probably played well off of each other. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at this Aaron Gordon pickup. Garrett Harris and RJ Hampton weren't doing like too much for the Nuggets. But I don't expect much from Aaron Gordon. He's not having that much of an efficient season, shooting around 40%, low 30s from three. We'll see what happens there. This was them just trying to make sure they can do something. They had to get better than what they were last year, and up until this point, they weren't. If anything, they were worse than what they were last year. So this is a trade to try to beef up some of their bench. I don't think Aaron Gordon is going to come into the starting lineup. Definitely not Gary Clark, but Aaron Gordon is probably going to come off the bench, run with some of that second unit, get mixed in with some starters, obviously, because the Nuggets are a team that plays their bench well. They try to go a little deep. So we'll see what happens with the Nuggets. I don't love the trade, but the Nuggets had to do something, and Aaron Gordon was available. The Celtics, another team taking advantage of this Orlando Magic fire sale, acquired Evan Fournier. And the Magic acquired and then waived Jeff Teague, who's now signed with the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And a couple of it's interesting with the pick. It's like a pick swap. The less favorable pick out of these two. Either the Celtics or Grizzlies 2025 second round pick, whichever is least favorable, and then the Celtics 2027 second round pick. So more picks, trying to just unload some roster space, unload some cap space, and some more picks. Magic are going younger. Magic going in tanking mode, trying to rebuild, trust the process. You feel me? Celtics acquire Evan Fournier and finally have I'll say replacement in air quotes for Gordon Hayward's production. They never really, I feel like, really replaced his production. When he left, I think they just expected Tatum and Brown to really step up and replace him naturally, which they have. They have stepped up. They're playing great. Both of them are playing great this season. Well-deserving All-Stars. But I think they were still missing something. As you can see by their standings, they're lower in the Eastern Conference standings right now. And Evan Fournier could be that piece for them, especially because I don't think they were getting some of the production they were expecting out of Kemba Walker. Evan Fournier putting up 20 points a game right now. I don't know if he'll continue to put that up throughout while he's on the Celtics, but anything close to that is great. Now that we've talked about all the teams that fleeced the Magic, let's talk about the other team in Florida and talk about the Miami Heat trade with the Rockets. The Heat acquired Victor Oladipo, and the Rockets picked up Kelly Olynyk, A.V. Bradley, and some pick swaps. Not even going to really talk about the Rocket part that much. The Rockets I don't really know exactly what they're doing. They're retooling their team. I think they're going to try to run with some of the younger guys, run with Christian Wood, see what John Wall can do. They're rebuilding, obviously. But the Heat acquired Victor Oladipo, which, in my opinion, is great for them. The Heat are starting to get into stride. They're the 8th seed right now. Mark my words, they're not going to end the season there. The Heat, realistically, are like a top 4 team in the East, not a bottom 4 team in the East. Adding to Victor Oladipo, the rest of their team is finally getting healthy. The Heat struggled with a lot of injuries this season, and Victor Oladipo wants to play for the Heat. He likes that culture. He wanted to play for the Heat in the bubble last year when the Pacers were playing the Heat in the was it the playoffs or just bubble games? I can't fully remember. But there's so many clips of Victor Oladipo helping Heat players up off the court when they got, went down for a hard foul or whatever, being in their huddles, chatting it up with Jimmy Butler all the time. He likes the Heat culture. He likes the Heat. He wants to be there. So I think you're going to see a resurged Victor Oladipo on the Miami Heat, and I'm excited for that. Next up, I want to talk about really quickly, the Clippers acquire Rajon Rondo from the Hawks, and the Hawks got Lou Williams. Shout out to Lou Williams going back to Magic City. It doesn't necessarily mean much for them. He's going to be a good backup point guard, shooting guard, scorer for the Hawks. But for the Clippers, getting Rajon Rondo could be pretty good for them. We saw what he was able to do in the playoffs for the Lakers. Show up, play good defense, help the pacing of that team. The Clippers are going to have to figure out where some of Lou Williams' scoring is going to come from. He was a great scorer for them off the bench. Rondo obviously isn't going to replace that scoring. Where they think they're going to get that from now, I'm not necessarily sure. Maybe the vision is the playmaking that Rondo will bring will raise the ceiling, or I guess I'll say the floor of all the other players, and they'll make up that scoring as a whole. The Raptors traded Gary Trent Jr. Well, I'm sorry. The Raptors received Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood from the Blazers for Norman Powell. This was an interesting trade to me. I thought Gary Trent Jr. was playing really good for the Blazers. I really like Rodney Hood on that team as well. And Norman Powell's also having a good season. I think this was just two teams that thought they could, make a deal and upgrade. Norman Powell's a great scorer. Trailblazers might have been looking for some more offense, trying to dig themselves out of the hole from the beginning of the season. They're also another team that's starting to get healthy, so keep an eye out for them. CJ McCollum's back. He's been back about a week and a half, starting to look like himself again. Nurkic has just got back this week, so it's going to take a couple more weeks for him to get back, especially a big man. They come back a little slower. But I think Norman Powell will, fit right in with this team. Blazers have that's just a team with a great culture. Trailblazers, Miami Heat, I think of teams like Toronto, just teams like that have had a core for a long time, or just have, even if it's not the core of players, but maybe the coaching has been there for a long time, they just have good culture, and the Trailblazers are one of those teams. There were a ton of other trades throughout the trade. There were a ton of other trades that happened at the deadline. I'm not necessarily going to touch on the rest of them. Some of them were really, really small trades that honestly I don't really, not to sound bad, but care that much about. Nuggets acquiring JaVale McGee. The Mavericks acquiring JJ Redick is really good in my opinion. JJ, you just can't go wrong with adding another shooter in your team. But I really want to talk about some of the signings that happened after players got waived. There's so much going on. So many signings happening. We're gonna jump right out and talk about the Nets first. Everyone's calling the Nets overpowered. I have a couple of opinions on it, so let's just hop right in. So we all know Blake Griffin signed to the Nets, and that was a big hoopla. And Blake brought up a really good point, and I think it was after his second game with the Nets, I believe. He was like, I don't understand why everybody's mad at me for coming to the Nets, because for the last 2 years, everybody's been telling me how trash I've been. And that's true. So many, the media, fans, you see it on Twitter, so many people basically just counted Blake Griffin out over the last couple of seasons with Detroit. Maybe not his first season with Detroit, like we talked about before. He was really good there, but especially this past season and the season before when he got injured, people just said he wasn't good. Mainly because he hadn't dunked since 2019. That was so much a part of his game. I didn't really like that stat, because that was a stat that was going crazy, and people were like really reacting to it, like, wow, Blake Griffin hasn't dunked since 2019. It's 2021. But then you forget that the season was over halfway through the season. His team didn't play in the bubble. We're not going to talk about it. LaMarcus Aldridge also signs to the Nets. So now the Nets have Kyrieirving, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, DeAndre Jordan, a lot of former and current All-Stars on this team. I'm very curious to see how the LaMarcus Aldridge is going to fit. He's not necessarily a traditional. I'll say he is a traditional stretch for. I mean, he's a traditional power forward in the sense that he's like mid 2000s game, early 2010s game. Doesn't really shoot the three very well. He never really developed a three-pointer at all, in my opinion. He's not a great defender. He's in his mid 30s. But it's not like he's bad by any means. LaMarcus Aldridge, I drafted him on my fantasy team this year. He was a late pickup for me because I had faith in him. So I'm excited to see what he can do for the Nets. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The Nets are looking like probably the favorites on paper. It pains me to say as a Sixers fan, but the Nets are looking like the favorites to come out of the East. The only thing that's going to hold the Nets back, in my opinion, from coming out of the East is going to be the Nets. And what I mean by that is if KD isn't healthy and doesn't come back and continue to be healthy in the playoffs, if Kyrie decides to be, I hate to say this, but I don't know a better way to say it. If Kyrie decides to be Kyrie and says, I'm not playing this week, and it's a week of a major playoff, series, that could beat them. It's like they would have to beat themselves. James Harden's been playing great. You can make the argument for James Harden being MVP for the season. If you watched last week's episode, you know who my MVP is. It's not him. But I've heard the argument being made for him making MVP because of what he's been doing for the Nets with Kevin Durant being out, with Kyrie being in and out. So they have a solid team. I have to take that back. They have a great team. On the Western Conference side of things, we have Andre Drummond, who signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. And now this is a signing that I'm really interested about, because so we all know Anthony Davis doesn't like playing center. So on paper, you sign Andre Drummond. Anthony Davis doesn't have to spend time at center. Drummond is even a starting caliber center in the league, averaging, he's a walking 15 and 10. On a good day, a great day, he's a 20 and 15. But when you really think about it, like when you really, really break it down, what do, in my opinion, the Lakers need? I figured it'd be like a rim protector, like someone who can clamp up the paint, someone who could not necessarily clamp up the paint, but someone who can protect the rim, someone who can hedge a little bit in the pick and roll, someone who can fill the role that Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee had for the Lakers when they won their championship. And I don't think Drummond's that guy. Yes, Drummond is probably one of the best rebounders in the league, if not the best rebounder in the league. I've been on record on this podcast saying that before. I like Andre Drummond, another player who's on my fantasy team, but he's not someone who is known to be a paint defender. He's known to be a great rebounder, but he's not necessarily a great paint defender. He's not necessarily a rim protector, and he's definitely not good defending the pick and roll, and that's all everybody runs in the league nowadays. He's not a good post defender really either. Granted, he's young. Drummond, believe it or not, is, I believe, 26, 27 years old. He is young. And maybe him playing with the Lakers, being around LeBron, being around Anthony Davis, that might make him be a better player, but at least a better defensive player. But how is he going to guard the Jokic's of the league, the Joel Embiid's of the league, the Nikola Vucevic's of the league? Talking about centers who can stretch the floor, who can put the ball on the floor a little bit and blow by him. It's going to be very interesting to see what Andre Drummond does for the Lakers this season. Am I wishing ill will on him, bad luck on him? No, by any means, I'm definitely not. I'm just very curious to see what happens with them and what happens with the Lakers. He's going to have some time to, I guess, just learn on his own without Anthony Davis, without LeBron, because they're still out and they'll probably still be out for a couple of weeks. So it'll just be basically him, Kuzma, and the gang. But it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. So I touched on it. I hinted at it earlier, but I'm going to go back to the Eastern Conference, then I'll go to the West. And I just want to give my overall thoughts on what both conferences look like now after the deadline, after some of these waivers, some of these signings, and how I'm feeling going forward. So like I said, I already said the Nets likely going to be favorites coming out of the East unless they beat themselves. The Sixers, a lot of people wanted the Sixers, especially Sixers fans, wanted the Sixers to be a little more active at the trade deadline. Personally, I did not. I'm happy with what we did. I'm not in love with George Hill, picking him up. The center Bradley that we gave up for him was a nice young center who, especially with Joel Embiid out right now, I think we could have kept him and let him and Dwight play a lot of that five. But maybe they wanted to them trading Bradley told me two things. One, they felt that they really needed a veteran point guard who can help run some of our offense, shoot a little bit, make smart decisions, especially in the playoffs. And two, I think they're more optimistic on Joel Embiid's return than they're letting on, because if they thought he was going to be out longer, I don't think they would have just placed, basically at this point, all the center responsibilities on Dwight Howard by himself, because Bradley was playing very well as a center, and Joel Embiid was good for, I don't want to say friends, but like Bradley's game. I'll definitely say that he liked Bradley's game. The Bucks picking up Jeff Teague, I don't really know what I think of Jeff Teague. To me, Jeff Teague is, throughout his career, he's not a bad point guard. He had those couple of years with the Hawks, but then he never really, I guess I'll say, reached that peak again. And what that kind of tells me is Jeff Teague is what a lot of people call a system point guard. If he has a good coach who can run a good system, then he should fit that system. But to me, and ironically, it's the same coach from when he was on the Hawks, but that coach Budenholzer doesn't feel like he's doing the same thing. Doesn't feel like he's running a system. So much of the Bucks offense, I've been saying this for the last couple of years, so much of the Bucks offense just runs through Giannis, which I get, because when you have Giannis, you have to give him the ball. And it works in the regular season. But when it comes down to the playoffs and teams can scheme against him, have time to scheme against him, and literally build a wall, and he can't do anything with the ball but stand at the top of the key and halfway attempt to shoot a three, it really, I think, slows down their offense. I don't know how much Jeff Teague can really make a difference, considering you already have a great point guard in Drew Holiday. So obviously Jeff Teague's probably going to be coming off the bench. I wish him the best. I don't really know. From there, I think you're going to have some teams that move up. The Heat are definitely probably going to move up. I think the Celtics can move up with the addition of Evan Fournier. Right now, they're 7-8. Celtics at 7, Heat at 8. Probably going to slide up. The Hornets are probably going to slide down a little bit, like we talked about last week with the loss of LaMelo Ball. I wouldn't be surprised if the Knicks low-key stay right there, unless the Celtics and Heat go crazy. They're not really that far behind. For example, the Heat 22-24 at 8th seed. The Knicks are only 24-22, so they're only 2 games behind the 4th seed, and the East is very close right now. Surprisingly, that I feel like hasn't been the case for a while now. Would love to see the Bulls make the playoffs, if it's at least just making that play-in game and maybe sneaking in there. I don't know who they're going to beat out unless the Hornets really drop out of the playoffs. But let's go out west. After talking about all the trades, who I'm surprised. I am surprised that I'm not surprised. 2 teams that weren't really that active at the trade deadline. Actually, I don't think they were active at all. I'd have to double check. The Jazz and the Suns, who are still sitting up top 2 in the Western Conference. The Jazz sitting 34-11, Suns 31-14. The Clippers right behind them, 31-16. Jazz and the Suns didn't make any moves. That shows me that they're confident in their team. They're confident in their players. And they think they're going to keep on winning. And I'm telling you, man, if you haven't watched the Suns yet, you need to watch them. It's just fun. It's nice fun. It's fun basketball. It goes to show, I'm going to probably talk about it every episode, goes to show the Chris Paul effect, that the fact that this team, the team who has been, Devin Booker has been saying, we're going to make the playoffs, we're going to make the playoffs, we're going to make the playoffs, and they haven't made the playoffs. You add Chris Paul, they're the second team in the West. That says a lot. The Jazz, like I said, didn't make that many moves. I don't think they made any moves, but they're confident in their team. They're on a 5-game winning streak. They won 7 out of their last 10. Why change? Why fix what's not broken? The Nuggets hopefully can get a little better. I don't think they saw themselves being the 5th seed at 28-18, considering they've been the top 3. I think the last couple of seasons, I think a lot of that comes down if they had Jeremy Grant, and the progression that he's made would have helped them a lot, especially defensively. Portland Trailblazers, keep an eye on the Portland Trailblazers. I don't see them ending the season. I see them ending either number 4 or number 5. When the season's over, they're going to be 4 or 5 seed. That's my hope. The Spurs will likely drop out of the playoff race. Popovich is going to do his best to keep them there, but they're showing that they want to go younger with not keeping LaMarcus Aldridge, with waiving him. DeMar DeRozan's still an excellent player. It's actually funny. Speaking of DeMar DeRozan, Candace Parker on TNT, one of the TNT analysts, said that DeMar DeRozan would have a lot more respect if he played in the 90s, early 2000s. He'd be one of the greats. And I don't disagree at all. He has, without sounding blasphemous, he has a Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant type game. Like, he lives in the mid-range. He doesn't shoot a bunch of threes. He can get to the basket. He has a nice pull-up game, fadeaway game from the mid-range, play scrappy. He's just unfortunately not meant for this era. The Dallas Mavericks, I don't think anybody saw the Dallas Mavericks being this bad. Porzingis, I don't know if he's not fitting. I don't know if he's not healthy. If he can get in stride and get to what he wants to be, what we know he can be, they can move up. I mentioned it earlier. But the addition of J.J. Redick, in my opinion, is really good for that team. J.J. Redick could do for them what he did for us on the Sixers. He really plays well off a big who can handle the ball and set good screens. So some of that two-man game that J.J. Redick and Joel Embiid ran for a season for the Sixers, they can run something very similar with him and Porzingis. Honestly, even him and Luka. Luka's big enough to set some of those screens and even more dangerous off the ball. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Keep your eye out on the Pelicans. I think they can make a move. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs. I really don't. They're 20-25, currently the 12th seed in the West. it's not a lot of spots in the Western Conference for them to make the playoffs. They might make a play-in game, especially with the Warriors sliding probably because of the Steph Curry injury. I can't remember how long he's out. But these last couple of weeks, last couple of games, I won't say weeks, last couple of games, they're letting Zion Williamson dominate the ball more and more. And I don't mean dominate with the negative connotation it usually has. I mean as in letting him to bring the ball up, letting him run some of the offense, letting him decide what to do. Because when they do that, good things happen. He either scores or he assists on a score. They can't guard him. No one in the league can guard Zion Williamson. And once the Pelicans really realize that and give him the ball, yes, I'm not saying don't take the ball away from Lonzo. I'm not saying don't take the ball away from Brandon Ingram. Those are also great players in their own right. But I'm saying you got a once in a lifetime talent with Zion Williamson. You got to find a way to give him the ball more. And hopefully the Pelicans figure it out. But overall, those are my thoughts for the trade deadline, some of the waivers, the signings, and then just a quick recap of how I think the season's going to progress moving forward. Thanks so much for watching. If you get this far, like I always say, you are a real one. Appreciate the support. You know what I mean? Do something different. Go on Apple Podcasts. No matter where you're watching this, go to Apple Podcasts, drop a 5-star review. It's much appreciated. Shows that you're a real one. And I will see you guys next week. I'm out. Peace.